Hello, I'm Richard with EV4U Custom Conversions, and this is episode 6 of a beginner's guide to EV conversions. And in this episode, we're going to talk about switches, relays, and contactors. A switch in its most basic form is used to turn something on or off, but we're going to see that it can do a little bit more than that. And where a relay can be used as a remote switch, and we'll talk about contactors also. So let's get started. We're going to go over and take a look at some samples of switches. We're going to look at them with a multimeter and see how they work. But let me draw the schematic for a simple switch. So we've got that's a switch. And so when this would close, and it would be in this position, the switch would be closed. Okay? Now, there's different types of switches which we're going to talk about, but let's get some other basics down first. So this would be the common side, and in this case this would be the normally open. So this would be common, and this would be normally open, abbreviated NO, and this is typically abbreviated COM. And so this is also known as a single pole, single throw switch. In other words, this is a single pole and it's a single throw, on or off. And we'll take a look at that, but there's another one that's common, and it's a this was called a single pole double throw. And so this is your common. This would be normally closed, and this would be normally open. So you kind of see in the pattern there. Now, typically, the common side, this would be our supply. So this could be our battery right here. So our battery, and then it would go to some kind of load, and then it returns. So when the switch is closed, the light would come on, and when the switch is open, the light would go off. Now, we're going to take a look at different kinds of switch. So there's different types. Here's two types, single pole, double throw. But there's also different kinds of switch, like push button, toggle, rocker, key switch, all sorts of different reed switches, just all sorts of different types of switches. But the common ones that we're going to use in our conversion will be the single pole, single throw, and the single pole, double throw. Now, so we would have our commons, we have our battery coming here, and normally closed could be something that we want to have on except for when we flip the switch. And when we flip the switch, this would go off and this would go on. Just an easy example of what we would use a single pole double throw switch for. to switch the vehicle from forward to reverse. So our normally closed, our default position would be forward. We flip the switch from there and it goes to reverse. Just, an easy example. Well, let's go take a look at some physical examples, and then we'll come back and we'll actually talk about, some more examples on the whiteboard here. We're going to look at some different switches. Here's a toggle switch, and it's a single pole, single throw. Now, try to keep it on camera here. So it's labeled here, kind of rusty, but it's off and on. And we're going to, verify that using a multimeter in a moment. Just wanted to show you some other examples. This is a rocker switch, and again, off and on, or on and off. I don't know which is which on this. I don't see where it's labeled. But using our multimeter, we'll figure out which is which. Here's another rocker switch. Notice it's got extra terminals, and it's actually labeled here that this is the power, and this is ground, and this is a load. So, you know what that tells me? That this is a lit switch. In other words, if I can get the right angle, it's got a light right there. So when this is on, there would be a light that would light up. So this is a single pole, single throw, lit switch, switch with a light that is got information on here. And we're going to talk about that in a moment, if I stay in the camera. This is a 12-volt DC switch with 30 amp contacts. So one of the things that we're going to be talking about as we go forward is the rating of the switch. What's the voltage rating and what's the current rating? So that's 12 volts DC, 30 amps. Okay, this one is not a lit switch. It has 3 terminals, so that tells me that this is a single pole double throw switch, like what we showed on the whiteboard. So one position will be normally closed, another will be normally opened, and we're going to take a look and see which is going to be what, which ones are common, so forth. We'll look at that in a moment. A couple other styles of switches. This is a push button switch, and this is called a momentary switch. In other words, I press it, and as soon as I let it comes off. Okay, and so this can be used because this is a single pole double throw also. So you can, depending on which contacts you use, you can have it to where this is on as soon as you push it, or it would be on when it's out. Whatever you would, however you would decide to use the switch, or a couple other uses, but it's a lit switch also. And depending on how you wire it, it can be lit when you press the button or off the button, or the light can be controlled individually. It's actually a separate circuit. So that's, and this is something you'll see we use in our conversions, not the momentary one, but we use what they call a latching one. And so we'll use it where you press this, and we'll use one with a blue light, and you press that, and it stays in, and it turns blue. That's for reverse. And you press it again, you'd be in forward. Here's an example of another push button switch. When I press this one, it stays down. I hope that shows up in the camera. Press it again, it pops out. And some of them you get where they pop out and they actually come above the surface. These are recessed, so on or off, depending on how you want to wire it. So let's go back, get some of these things out of the way here. Well, one more switch I'll show you here. The key switch. And so you might, want to have a key switch stashed in the glove box or under the dash or something, where you could have it to where you have a daughter mode or a valet mode, and you can make sure they can't override it, because you could put it into that mode and remove the key. And you have to have it this mode for the normal mode. Now it's locked in daughter mode or valet mode. Or, can be used as a starter. I mean, lots different uses for key switches. Just another type of switch. Okay, here's our multimeter. I'm going to turn it on, and I'm going to go to the ohms setting, resistance setting. We can use this for checking continuity. I'm going to take one lead and try not to bump the tripod and keep in the frame of photo here. And so one lead to each terminal. Notice if I connect them together here, that goes to 0. That means there's no resistance. Okay, means we have continuity. If I put it here, the switch is obviously off. When I flip the switch, it goes to 0. Now the switch is on, and I can see right here it says on, off. Okay. Now, let's look at the single pole double throw. Now, two are closer together, one's apart, so I'm going to make the assumption that this is the common right here. So that's common. That's normally open. And that one's open also. So guess what? That's not common. Let's switch it around. So we didn't have anything between here and there, and we didn't have anything between here and there. So let me put this one here, and we'll check here. Aha. So it looks like, so if we go here, we're open. There, we're closed. If I flip the switch, now that one's open. So both of these are open. So you know what that's telling me? Guess who the common is in the center. So that's common. So that's normally open on this one. We flip the switch. That's closed. If we go over here, that's closed. And that's open. So when that's open, this one's closed. There you have it. So we ID'd it here. So with the switch in this position, it doesn't matter what position the switch is. This is always going to be common. But with the switch in this position, that's our normally closed. And that's our normally open. I put it in this position. And of course, now that is closed. And that is open. Okay? So that's, if you didn't know, that's how you would be able to check process elimination. We figured out, which terminal would go where. So let's talk about, let's see. We covered the fact that these are for a certain voltage, and they usually will show the rating on here. And this shows small writing, looks like 18 amps, 125 volts AC, 250 volts AC, 16 amps. So it looks like it says on there. Kind of small for my eyes. This one has some printed on it too. There's 16 amps, 125 volts AC. 10 amps, 250 volts AC. So anyway, your switch will be rated by voltage and by the current. So that's the contacts are rated, how much current they can handle. And so let's take a look at relays. Well, here's some relays. And we're going to look at these closer, but we're going to just take a look at them, and then we're going to go to the whiteboard, and then we'll come back. But a relay is an electromechanical switch. It can be solid state, so it's not mechanical, it's all electric. But these are what I call a standard automotive relay, and it's electromechanical. And we're going to look at the innards in a moment. This one is a single pole, single throw. It's good up to 14 volts DC, and it's 40 amps, up to 40 amps, which is common. This one, 12 volts, 30 to 40 amps, single pole, double throw. This particular one is a 12 volt coil, and I want to say these are 10 amps. Little contacts, we'll look at that closer. This one, look at the size of the spades on this, and this is a 24 volt, and I believe it's a 50 amp. I don't see where it says on here, but I'm almost positive this is a 50 amp. So that's what they physically look like. I've got a clear one we'll take a look at so we can see the innards. Got a dissected one we'll look at. But first, let's go to the whiteboard and look at what it looks like electrically in a schematic sense. Here's a schematic of a relay, and we'll be able to see that we have a coil here, and we have our switch and single pole, single throw. We've got our common, our normally open. And I want to see if this shows up here on camera. And trying to see if it shows up here. Okay, so you can see there's a coil of wire there, and that coil of wire, when we put power through there, it's going to create an electromagnetic coil, electromagnet, okay? And that electromagnet is going to pull this piece down. And you see that it closes that switch. This is one that we're showing right here. This is a single pole double throw, so this is the normally closed up here. I'm having a hard time keeping this in frame. So that's the normally closed, and the bottom one's the normally open. So when it's energized, it would go down. When it's not energized, it's going to come up. It does that because there's a spring. You can see the spring on the back side here. So anyway, that's what it looks like inside the case of our electromagnetic relay. So whenever the power's on, and this could go to a switch, and this could be switched, the electromagnet switched, and then it switches that. And you're like, well, why? Why use a relay? Well, relays, like switches, are going to have a different rating. So the switch part itself, you're going to have a voltage rating and a current rating. And then in the coil rating is going to also have a voltage and current. Now, you saw that in my hand, little tiny relay. That's a 30 amp relay, and it only takes milliamps for this to draw in that switch. So why a relay? Well, we can switch a 30 amp load with milliamps. So we could have, say, a switch in the dash, and you have a relay and a load somewhere else, and you don't have to run big heavy wires, and have a 30 amp switch in your dash and run 30 amps the length of the car or whatever. So what they do, typical circuits are headlights, horns, in our conversions, power brake vacuum pumps, that type of thing. We're going to use small wire, a very low current circuit to power a higher current circuit. Now, you can also use a DC circuit to power an AC circuit. And this is an example with an EV necessarily, but just possible cases. You can have, the coil can be AC or DC. So you can have an AC thing operating a DC, circuit that's controlled by that relay. So the coil can be AC or DC. They can be different voltages. I showed you one was 24 volts. And then different rating on your contacts. Now, let's take a quick look at a common one again, and that is the single pole double throw, which would look like this. And this would be normally closed. And so, common use for this, again, like we were showing with the single pole double throw switch, would be for reverse. So the common would go to, would be coming from our controller, and on like the Curtis, this is 12 volts control. And then the normally closed we would use for forward, and the normally open would be reverse. So why? Well, because it allows us to run fewer wires and smaller wires. So in this case, it would be fewer wires. So if we have, like you have in the Volkswagens, for instance, you're going to have the switch, and I can't write sideways, switch in the dash, okay? And the controller is in the engine bay. So there's some distance there. So if we had a switch in the dash, you're going to have the wire come from the controller to the switch, and then you're going to have forward and reverse go back to the controller. So that would be 3 wires that we would have to run. Okay? Now, we don't do that, of course. What we do is we're going to use a single pole, single pole, double throw relay. And we're going to have power that's going to come from an ignition switch source. So ignition, 12 volts. It's going to come up here to a switch, and it's going to be a single pole, single throw switch, and that's our reverse switch. So we close that switch, it energizes this relay and puts us in reverse. But what that allows us to do is run one wire. Instead of 3 in that example, we're going to run one wire from the switch, this wire right here. It's going to go back to our controller. And then the relay will be back here next to the controller. And we're going to run 3 small, short little wires right there. We only have to run one small wire the length of the car. Okay? So that's why I said early on, it's, basically it can be a remote switch. So one other common one that we'll see in the conversion world, and that is a single pole double throw. Let me see if I can modify this to do that. So what we would have so it's double pole, so there's our second one. And you can draw this however you want. But, so this one's normally closed. This is normally open, normally closed. But these two are connected. So when I flip the switch, those go together. So one purpose of that could be, there's lots of reasons you might want to use it, and we actually use 1 or 2 in every conversion. But an example would be, again, the reverse. So make sure we're still recording here. It looks like it. So this would be, from the controller again, as I mentioned. And it goes up here, and this would be forward, and this would be reverse, okay? Well, what's the other side going to be for, you're asking? Well, this side can be, again, an ignition switched, so that's 12 volts. And the normally open here could go to our reverse lights. Well, why do you want that? Well, if you're using electronic reverse, you have to accommodate for reverse lights, because normally a car, when you put it in reverse, the reverse light switch is in the transmission or the transaxle. And so when you shift the car into reverse, it turns on your reverse lights. So you can see, people can see that you're backing up. You can see in the dark. So when you're just using a button, toggle, rocker, push button, whatever you're using to electronically switch into reverse, well, this allows us to use one wire, operate this double pole, double throw relay. It switches us from forward to reverse, and it turns on the reverse lights for us. Pretty easy. One part solves, takes care of 2 functions. So let's go take a look at one. That's one of the things I mentioned. I've got a double pole, double throw relay that's clear. We can see it and be able to see how it's wired and how it works. So let's take a look at that. Okay, here's
the double pole, double throw relay that I was talking about. You can see the coil in the back here. And you can see both sides have a set of terminals. So you can see there's 4 and 4. Well, 2 terminals will be the relay. If I can stay. 2 terminals will be the relay. You've got your 2 commons, and you've got a normally open on each side and a normally closed. Double pull, double throw. So we can see that, if I can. So you can see that this bottom one here goes to one side of the coil, and on the other side here it goes to the other side of the coil. And this is the common. You can see that wire go up here, and it goes to our little reed piece here. So that's our common, and you can see that there's a gap between this one and that reed. So this is our normally open, and this is our normally closed. And it's just 2 identical switches. We flip it over, you got the same thing on the other side. So double pull, double throw. And so remember, your relay is going to have the rating of your coil. In this case, it's a 120 volt coil. And the contacts are rated, looks like 11 amps, I think I'm reading. I'm sorry, I was looking at the thing, getting it close enough where I could see it, took it out of the screen. Anyway, relay, okay? This one also, it's just much smaller scale. Again, double pull, double throw, single pull, single throw. On the automotive style like this, you'll notice you have 2 that are parallel to one another. That's the coil. The one that's perpendicular here to the one across from it, this will be common, and this is going to be your normally open. On a single pull, double throw, again, these are your coil, common, normally closed, normally open. This one, just a different rating on your contacts and your coil. It's a 24 volt coil. And you can see the coil connections are much smaller. And so this is your common, and that's your normally open. And there's a rating, and a numbering system. And we have another video that we talk about and go into relays in much greater depth. And if I remember, I'll put a link to that in the description below. But as promised, we were also going to talk about contactors. So I'm just going to show you 2 contactors here real quick. Here's one contactor. There's another one. Now, these are pretty much similar critters. This is a 12 volt coil, and these are, I believe, I don't remember, they're 500 or 750 amp contacts. So these are the terminals for the contacts, terminals for the coil. This is I believe it's at least a 500 amp contactor, and it's a 48 volt coil. These would be your coil connections. These should be your contactors. And there, again, I'm not going to go into depth on all this, but there's a side that is for the load, and a side that the power. So A1 is power, A2 is the load. And some are polarity specific on your coil. Those little automotive ones weren't necessarily, but this one has a diode in there, and it's polarity specific, and that's so that when you disconnect or turn off the coil, that the current that's created when that electromagnetic field collapses, that it doesn't create current back down the line. That's a little more than our basic guide here. But anyway, in general, you notice this is the same as the relays, in that we have a coil and we have contacts. And you have, the coil ratings and you have the contact ratings. In general, bottom line, a contactor is a heavy-duty relay, okay? And so we'll use these for like switching heaters, switching, could be used for switching battery packs, switching your controller, that type of thing.
Well, as always, if you want more information on the topic and want it laid out in a more, organized fashion and with much greater detail, visit evworkshops.com. If you have any questions regarding any of our videos, and if you have suggestions for a video, email us at info@evforyounow.com. And appreciate it if you'd like and subscribe. And we thank you for watching, and I hope to see you next time.